successful, meaningful elections depend on making informed choices. Previous elections to the European Parliament, as we have heard many times, as we know, have essentially been about domestic politics. These elections are different because even domestic politics raise European issues, and there's at least potentially some meaningful choices between the parties running for election to the European Parliament. So the challenge of informed choice is a real challenge this time. And what we are going to hear now from H.Trechsel, the head of the Department of Political Science at the European University Institute, is a tool developed by him and a large European team that will assist voters in making informed choices when they go and decide whom to vote for, and with the added benefit of helping create a political space and political community in Europe. I invite H.Trechsel to present EU and I.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's a great honor for me to present to you our work that we have undertaken over the past, well, I would say, couple of years to create indeed this voting advice application that we called EUDO. Let me briefly get you through this and show you what we have been doing. We parted from an observation, actually a series of observations, and that is that democracy is in dire straits. Trust in institutions, we've heard it today before, is going down. We know that turnout is generally going down. We know that party identification, membership in parties, affiliations with parties is on the down. Party cohesion within the parties is also suffering quite heavily, and at the same time we witness a rise of guardian institutions such as central banks or independent regulatory agencies. Now, traditional cleavages which have been shaping the electoral space are losing in power. The opacity of policy positions of parties is on the rise. We find ourselves as voters facing very complex multidimensional issue spaces. The fragmentation of the system, of the party system, is going up. Electoral volatility, partly as a consequence, is also on the upside, and at the same time we face unpredictability of electoral outcomes. Now, this is all not so good, really, for democracy, and the consequences of this, these observations is that voters get increasingly lost. They don't find themselves anymore in politics, in electoral politics. They get disaffected from it. Civic education is suffering, of course, and this is, and we have heard it here today, and we'll hear it again over the next 2 weeks at least, this is particularly acute at the European level. So there is an irony, however, and the irony is that voters are not really lost, but not just lost, excuse me, but they are actually very interested in politics. They are curious in politics. They may not know who to vote for. They may not find themselves comfortable in the partisan space, but they are extremely curious. Interest in politics is one of the most stable attitudinal variables that we have in the social sciences. It just doesn't move. Interest in politics, a little bit depending on the context, is high and stable. And an example that shows you why interest in politics is high is this incredible success of these voting advice applications that are proliferating across Europe. Now, what is a voting advice application? Very briefly, the logic is that you go online, you find a quiz, if you want, where you can fill out, answer questions, and the system matches your preferences with the preferences, the positions of the political parties, and out comes basically a list with your preferred parties and the most detested ones. Now, this started quite some time ago already in the Netherlands, a system called StemWiser invented that, first on paper, then on little CD-ROMs, and later on, of course, on the internet. And ever since, as I mentioned, there is a massive proliferation that took place of these tools. And nowadays, in elections in Europe, it is almost unthinkable of having a campaign that is not somehow covered by a voting advice application. And the figures are stunning. In Switzerland, my home country, in the last federal elections, there was over 1 million voters that were using the smart vote tool developed there, and that corresponds to more than 1/4 of the electorate. In the Netherlands, over half of the electorate was using it, and in Germany, in the last federal elections, the Wahlomat, the German system, came up with 12.3 million users in just 3 weeks. That is, again, like 1/5 of the German electorate. So why is it that these tools are so popular? Basically, I think it is because citizens here get a I cannot read this now. Sorry, they are able to learn something about themselves. They get a tailor-made voting information that you don't get when you walk through the streets or when you watch TV, when parties are campaigning in general terms. They're not addressing you as an individual voter. Here you can go onto a system and you can find out something about where you, John or Paul or Elizabeth, you are. All right, so for 2014, in 2 weeks' time, there will be 4 million Europeans that are called to the ballots. That's the second largest election in the world after the one in India. And we thought it would be very sad if we would miss this occasion to try out and create a transnational European-wide voting advice application. So we did that, and we called it EUandi. And what is EUandi consisting of? Well, first of all, EUandi concerns the entire EU28. So this is not just a voting advice application that runs in Italy, but it runs everywhere in Europe. It comes in 24 languages. There were 242 political parties running in these elections and satisfying our criteria for inclusion that we coded. This resulted in 7,200 positions that are not just coded, but also documented. And we used for that 121 country experts, mainly our students at the European University Institute, all very fine experts of their home country politics, and we could tap in this extremely large and fruitful reservoir of knowledge that we dispose at the EUI. And we were accompanied by 40 advisors, which are really, I could say, the who is who in the social sciences. So if I can propose now to you to just very briefly try it out, so you can have a first impression of how that works. You go onto our homepage, which is euandi.eu. You can choose the language and you can choose the country. So here I would say we remain with Italy, but we're going to do it in English. And then you start basically the application. And if we have the internet ready, it would even work. Here it goes. You're asked to answer 30 statements, and I'm going to go quickly through them. For example, the first one, social programs should be maintained even at the cost of higher taxes. Okay, let's tend to agree. It should be harder for EU immigrants working or staying in Italy to get access to social assistance benefits than it is for Italian citizens. I don't agree, etc. We just go through it now, and you can see we cover a lot of space here. Political space. Basically, these are the topics, these are the items that are making this campaign. Bank and stock market gains should be taxed more heavily. Let's agree. Governments should reduce workers' protection regulations in order to fight unemployment. Maybe not, etc. And we go on, and you can see that we did a thorough job at trying to identify the hot topics on which parties are basically competing in these elections. Okay, once you're done with this, you go on. You can not just indicate what is what direction your positioning goes towards, if you're in agreement or if you're against a proposal that we're making here. For example, you're in favor or against same-sex marriage legalization. You can also indicate how important that is to you. So we can measure saliency here, and we can include that for the voter. We can say this is important, and this is important. We can carry on, and then we can also say this here is not important, that is not important either, etc. And that can actually is actually taken up in the algorithm. This is something we're going to go skip. We ask some social demographics, very basic ones, so we can do some research on it. And then we get the results. And as you have seen, it works quite quickly. So for this random voter who is just extremely neutral with everything, you get this party here first. And that is the Scelta Europea. So you can see what we said, you can see what the party said, or how we coded the party, and you can see why we coded the party this way. For every single proposal across all of Europe. Okay, you can also look at how big these parties are, because if you want to make an informed choice, maybe you don't want to throw your vote away for a party that is not going to make it in the parliament if you are strategically thinking. So you want to go for the next biggest party, and you can do it by adding this and not. Very interestingly is you can choose the country you want to match with. So even if you vote in Italy, you may be interested in knowing what party is the one that comes closest to you in all of Europe. And the system allows you to basically calculate this too. In this case here, this is a Bulgarian party, it looks like, that matches your views best. So that is the ludic part about it. Now, you can also express this match between you and the parties by looking at this three-dimensional representation of the political space that we created. And here you can see we have an axis which goes from the economic left to the economic right, one of the major axes in politics, of course. Then we have the traditional versus the liberal values, which is one of the major secondary axes, and we have the pro-anti-European axis. Now, this random neutral user, of course, finds him or herself in the middle, and you see these the planets here, the stars, not just 5, that are floating around here. And you can go in and check out how close you are to the biggest or to the smallest stars in the different galaxies. And you can check out how this is changing, how these galaxies look very differently from one country to the other. There are spaces which are completely left open, and there is no star in it in some countries, and they're populated in others. So it's also a very educative tool. What we have really improved on towards former versions and compared to any other voting advice application is that we basically allowed people not just to match themselves with the offer at stake, with the offer on display, the parties, but we offered people actually a way to match with each other. That's why we call it you and I. And we said, how would it be, how would my Europe look like if I was able to compare my views to all other Europeans? So we created a map of Europe, and on this map of Europe, in real time, you basically see who else is sharing your views. So here are some extremely neutral people, up here as well, etc., and other places where you don't match very well with your political Europe. So that's a nice gimmick. It's very interesting for people to look at that. But basically what it does, it is incentivizing you to then not only see where are the best places for you to live politically, but to actually get in touch with these people. And you can do that through a social network integration. And here I go onto my Facebook account. And let's see if this works. And what I get back from this, from the application is basically a list of people that match exactly my profile. Now, it's still turning. This takes a bit of time. Maybe it's too demanding right now here. Here it is. And you can see people that I have never heard of, I've never met in my life, but that were actually willing to share their data with the system, with me, and say, yes, I go out, I do my outing, my political outing, and I want to be seen as, in this case, a very neutral voter. And of course, you can then contact them. If you click on that, you go to their Facebook page, etc. And this allows you to create communities. You can create your own communities and say, I want to join these communities without having to go through a political party. So we will see how many people will be doing this, how many people are interested in joining these virtual communities that are transnational. Okay, and then we have an extra questionnaire, of course, where we would like people to fill out, give us information about themselves, so we can use that for our academic purposes. I'm going to go back to my presentation and would like to tell you, to finish here, why we think that this is really something important. What we are doing here is we're connecting citizens to politics. Citizens are curious, and we are satisfying their curiosity by offering them a snapshot view, which is actually quite detailed as a snapshot, but in a form that is digestible to them. And this connects them back into to politics. We also think it is very important because we connect citizens to the European elections. And we will see it in the panel that will follow the coffee break, how important turnout, for example, is for European elections. It has been mentioned before, and European elections are suffering a lot from very low turnout. We think that maybe by providing this app, we can do a little bit something about that. We also think that this is really innovative and new because we're actually allowing citizens to connect with each other, to form communities, transnational communities, or just very local communities based on their political preferences. So what we're doing, in a sense, we're transnationalizing the European elections, something Andrew Duff has been asking for a long time in the European Parliament, and said these are basically a series of 28, not European, but national elections. Let's make them European by having one big European voting space. This is not a reality so far. That didn't happen so far. But here, virtually, at least, it does happen. Because without the Finnish party campaigning in Portugal in Portuguese, the Portuguese voter can actually see that there is a Finnish party that is matching his or her preferences better than any of the national parties in Portugal. It's just an example, but for the same parliament. So finally, I think we should also mention that this is an academic endeavor. We're not just good doers here. We're pursuing an academic endeavor. We want to get more knowledge about what is the impact of these voting advice applications in such a complex space across the entire European Union. And this will allow us to learn invaluable information about political parties, about citizens' attitudes, about public opinion, about the internet and politics in general. And finally, I think we're going to learn an awful lot about Europe itself. Thank you very much.